For each cloud cost model listed below, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its characteristic in the option column. Charges based on actual usage. Consumption-based model involves paying a monthly or yearly fee. Subscription-based model, charges vary with resource consumption. Pay-as-you-go model, ideal for unpredictable workloads. Pay-as-you-go model, predictable costs over a fixed period. Subscription-based model, suitable for flexible billing. Consumption-based model, pay only for what you use. Consumption-based model, monthly or annual fee regardless of resource use. Subscription-based model. Let me explain. We begin with charges based on actual usage. This clearly describes the consumption-based model, where users are billed based on the resources they consume, such as storage or compute time. Next involves paying a monthly or yearly fee. That fits the subscription-based model, which uses fixed pricing over set time periods, just like a Netflix or Microsoft 365 subscription. Then we have charges vary with resource consumption. That's best matched with the pay-as-you-go model. It reflects real-time usage charges which go up or down depending on how much you use, similar to a prepaid mobile plan. Now, ideal for unpredictable workloads is also pay-as-you-go. This model adjusts costs based on demand, making it perfect for businesses with fluctuating resource needs, like e-commerce sites during peak seasons. Predictable costs over a fixed period is naturally a subscription-based model. Because of its consistent billing cycle, budgeting becomes easier. Suitable for flexible billing, again, describes the consumption-based model. Since you're billed only for what you consume, it offers flexibility across services. Speaking of which, pay only for what you use also falls under the consumption-based model, reinforcing the idea that you're not billed for unused capacity. Lastly, monthly or annual fee, regardless of resource use, matches the subscription-based model. Even if you don't fully utilize the service, you're still charged the same amount, much like a gym membership. So this is how the three cost models, pay-as-you-go, consumption-based, and subscription-based, align with various billing characteristics in the cloud. Indicate whether the following statements are true or false. In a SaaS environment, the user is responsible for physical infrastructure maintenance. False IaaS offers the most control to the user compared to PaaS and SaaS. True PaaS allows developers to build applications without worrying about underlying hardware and OS management. True SaaS provides the least flexibility compared to IaaS and PaaS. True. Let me explain. Starting with the first statement. In a SaaS environment, the user is responsible for physical infrastructure maintenance. This is false. In a SaaS setup, everything, including infrastructure, platform, and application, is handled by the cloud provider. Users only interact with the software interface. Think of tools like Gmail or Microsoft 365. Now to the second. IaaS offers the most control to the user compared to PaaS and SaaS. That's true. With IaaS, users manage everything from the operating system up, while the provider only handles the physical infrastructure. So users have more control, for example, choosing their own OS and installing custom software. Moving on, PaaS allows developers to build applications without worrying about underlying hardware and OS management. That's also true. The platform layer is managed by the provider, enabling developers to focus purely on building and deploying code. Services like Azure App Service and Google App Engine are great examples. Lastly, SaaS provides the least flexibility compared to IaaS and PaaS. This is true. Since SaaS abstracts all management layers, users can't customize infrastructure or software components. Great for simplicity, but limited in flexibility. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Cloud computing uses the internet to deliver computing services. True users are responsible for securing the accounts and identities connected to the cloud. True cloud computing is limited to traditional IT offerings. False cloud services can be accessed only from specific devices. False. Let me explain. To begin, the first statement says, cloud computing uses the internet to deliver computing services. That's true. Cloud services are designed to be delivered over the internet, allowing users to access storage, applications, and processing power remotely, which eliminates the need for on-premises infrastructure. Next, users are responsible for securing the accounts and identities connected to the cloud. This is also true. Under the shared responsibility model, users must implement secure passwords, enable multi-factor authentication, and manage access rights to protect their resources in the cloud. Now, the statement, cloud computing is limited to traditional IT offerings, is false. In fact, cloud computing goes far beyond basic IT infrastructure. It now includes cutting-edge services like artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, and serverless computing, offering much more than traditional systems. Finally, cloud services can be accessed only from specific devices is false. Cloud solutions are intentionally designed to be device agnostic. Whether you're using a smartphone, tablet, or desktop, as long as the device is internet enabled, you can connect to your cloud resources. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. The shared responsibility model highlights the distribution of responsibilities between cloud service providers and consumers based on the type of cloud service used, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, SaaS. Let me explain. The shared responsibility model is essential in cloud computing because it clearly outlines who is responsible for what. In this model, responsibility is shared between the cloud provider and the customer, but the exact breakdown depends on the type of service being used. For instance, in infrastructure as a service, users manage the operating system, data, and applications, while the provider handles physical infrastructure and virtualization. Conversely, in software as a service, the provider manages almost everything, from infrastructure to applications, while the user is only responsible for access control and data. Meanwhile, although the cloud security model focuses on security, it doesn't clarify who handles which responsibilities. Similarly, the cloud ownership model might suggest who owns what, but it doesn't define responsibility boundaries. Finally, the service level agreement model relates to uptime and service guarantees, not responsibility sharing. So the shared responsibility model is the only one that defines these boundaries properly across different service types. Arrange the following shared responsibility model for a typical IaaS cloud service from the most consumer responsible tasks to the least consumer responsible tasks. Data and access security, application management, virtual machine management, physical infrastructure maintenance. Let me explain. We begin with data and access security, which is the top consumer responsibility. In an IaaS setup, the consumer is fully in charge of managing identities, permissions, encryption, and access control to safeguard sensitive information. Next comes application management. Here, the consumer is responsible for installing, configuring, and maintaining the applications running on the virtual machines. For example, managing a web server or a database system falls entirely under the user's control. Following that is virtual machine management. Consumers in IaaS must create, update, patch, and monitor virtual machines. This includes choosing operating systems, adjusting machine sizes, and ensuring updates are applied properly. Finally, we have physical infrastructure maintenance, which is the responsibility of the cloud provider. They handle all tasks related to the physical servers, storage, and networking components, so the consumer doesn't have to worry about the hardware layer. So, this sequence reflects how responsibility shifts from the consumer at the top to the provider at the bottom in an IaaS model. Which of the following statements are true about a software as a service SaaS solution? Select one answer. A, you are responsible for maintaining the solution infrastructure. B, you are responsible for deploying updates to the solution. C, you are responsible for solution availability and scalability. D, you are responsible for configuring the solution features. Let me explain. The correct answer here is D. You are responsible for configuring the solution features. In a SaaS model, the service provider manages everything behind the scenes. This includes infrastructure, scalability, updates, and maintenance. What's left for the user is simply to log in and configure the application settings based on their needs. Think of services like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce. You don't install or update them, you just use them and adjust settings like language preferences or user roles. Option A is incorrect because the provider handles all infrastructure needs, such as servers and storage. Option B is also wrong since updates are rolled out by the provider automatically. Option C is incorrect because scalability and availability are managed by the provider as part of the service guarantee. So in short, with SaaS, you focus on using the tool, not running it. Which of the following are common reasons why 100% uptime is rarely guaranteed in SLAs? Select two answers. A, it allows more flexible downtime windows for service maintenance. B, it demands duplicating every service component, which is costly. C, it eliminates the need for maintenance and updates. D, it requires redundant components to avoid service failure. Let me explain. The correct answers are B and D. Starting with option B, it demands duplicating every service component, which is costly. This is true because achieving 100% uptime would mean every single part of the system needs a backup. That includes servers, databases, networks, and more. Not only is that expensive, but it's also complex to maintain. Now, option D, it requires redundant components to avoid service failure, is also valid. To ensure that no single point of failure causes downtime, providers must design systems with multiple backups. That means layering redundancy across different regions, power sources, and even hardware, which again adds cost and complexity. On the other hand, option C is incorrect because maintenance and updates are unavoidable. Even the most reliable systems require patches or upgrades that might temporarily impact availability. Likewise, option A is also incorrect. If a provider guaranteed 100% uptime, they wouldn't have the luxury of flexible downtime windows. In fact, it would severely limit their ability to schedule maintenance at all. So in the real world, aiming for 99.9% or 99.99% uptime is far more practical than guaranteeing 100%. Your company is implementing an Azure-based application that needs to store large amounts of video files and provide scalable access to them. Which Azure storage service is the best fit? Select one answer. A, file storage. B, blob storage. C, queue storage. D, table storage. Let me explain. The correct answer is B, blob storage. Blob storage is specifically designed for storing unstructured data like video files, images, backups, and other multimedia. It provides scalability, high availability, and secure access, making it the go-to choice for media-heavy applications like video streaming platforms or content libraries. Now let's look at why the others don't fit. Option A, file storage, is great for lift and shift scenarios or shared file systems, but it doesn't scale well for large video files or high-volume access. Option C, queue storage, is meant for passing messages between application components. It has nothing to do with storing or delivering files. Lastly, table storage is a NoSQL key value store optimized for structured data, not for storing or delivering videos. So if your app handles large unstructured files and needs scalable, accessible storage, blob storage is the best choice. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Azure Active Directory Domain Services provides a managed domain service in Azure that synchronizes users and credentials from Entra ID. Let me explain. The correct term here is managed domain because Azure AD Domain Services is a fully managed version of Active Directory hosted in Azure. That means Microsoft takes care of all the patching, updates, and infrastructure work behind the scenes. You don't need to manage domain controllers or worry about server-level maintenance. Next is Entra ID, which was previously known as Azure AD. This is the directory that holds all user accounts, groups, and credential hashes. Azure AD DS synchronizes these from Entra ID so that legacy authentication protocols like NTLM and Kerberos can still work, which is especially useful for applications that aren't compatible with modern protocols. Now, why not the other options? On-premises AD is incorrect because Azure AD DS is cloud native. It's not just an extension of a local domain. Full OS control is also wrong since you don't manage the OS of the domain controllers in Azure AD DS. And finally, modern authentication doesn't fit because Azure AD DS focuses more on legacy support rather than OAuth or OpenID Connect. So in short, Azure AD DS acts as a bridge, giving you the benefits of Active Directory in the cloud, synced directly from Entra ID. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Azure Managed Disks are automatically handled by Azure without requiring storage accounts. Ultra disks provide the highest performance, while standard HDDs are the most cost-effective but lowest performing option. Let me explain. First, we have managed disks. These are the default disk type in Azure and are fully managed by Microsoft, meaning you don't need to manually create or maintain storage accounts. This simplifies deployment and ensures better performance management and scalability. Next, we consider performance. Ultra disks offer the highest performance among Azure's disk options. They're ideal for I/O-intensive workloads like large databases or mission-critical applications because they offer high throughput, high IOPS, and extremely low latency. Lastly, standard HDDs are the most affordable choice and are suited for less demanding workloads. However, that cost savings comes at the expense of speed. They deliver the lowest performance in terms of throughput and latency. So when choosing an Azure disk, it's a balance between performance needs and cost, and these options help match the right disk to the right workload. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure virtual networks allow Azure resources like VMs, web apps, and databases to communicate with each other. True. A virtual network is limited to a single Azure region and cannot span multiple regions. False. Public endpoints in Azure virtual networks allow external users to access Azure resources over the internet. True private endpoints in Azure virtual networks enable secure internal communication between Azure resources. True. Let me explain. Starting with the first statement, it's true that Azure virtual networks enable communication between Azure resources, such as virtual machines, web applications, and databases. This internal connectivity is essential for building distributed applications and managing services securely in the cloud. Now, the second statement is false. While a virtual network is typically created within a specific region, Azure allows cross-region connectivity through a feature called virtual network peering. This enables networks in different regions to function as a single, unified network. Next, the third statement is true. Public endpoints are used when a resource needs to be accessible over the internet. These endpoints are associated with public IP addresses, allowing external users or systems to reach services like Azure-hosted websites or APIs. Finally, the last statement is also true. Private endpoints use private IP addresses to allow secure internal access to services. This ensures that communication stays within Azure's network infrastructure, reducing exposure to internet-based threats. Altogether, these features provide both flexibility and security when designing network architectures in Azure. For each feature listed below the table, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its platform in the option column. Virtual machines runs on a single OS instance. Containers supports Docker, emulates full computer hardware, runs on a single OS instance, uses operating system level virtualization, supports Docker. Isolated runtime environment runs on a single OS instance. Let me explain. We begin with virtual machines, which are matched with runs on a single OS instance. This is because VMs emulate entire hardware stacks, and each one runs with its own guest operating system. They're heavier and provide full isolation at the OS level. Next is containers, which match with supports Docker. Containers don't emulate hardware. Instead, they use the host OS kernel but isolate apps and dependencies. This makes them lightweight and ideal for rapid deployment, and Docker is the most common tool used to manage them. Now, emulates full computer hardware also goes with runs on a single OS instance because this refers directly to what virtual machines do. They simulate CPU, memory, and other components. Uses operating system level virtualization, clearly belongs with supports Docker. This describes how containers function. They run isolated applications while sharing the same OS kernel underneath. Finally, isolated runtime environment matches runs on a single OS instance as well. Each VM runs in its own environment, isolated from others, even if they're on the same host. So, in summary, VMs are heavier and offer hardware emulation, while containers are lightweight and OS-level virtualized. For each Azure networking service listed below the table, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its purpose in the option column. Provides a private network in Azure for securely connecting Azure resources. Azure Virtual Network. Establishes a private connection between on-premises networks and Azure data centers. Azure Express Route. hosts domain name system records for your applications and services. Azure DNS enables encrypted cross-premises connectivity over the internet. Azure VPN Gateway supports custom DNS resolution within Azure Virtual Networks. Azure DNS offers high bandwidth, low latency connectivity to Azure. Azure ExpressRoute allows segmentation of networks into subnets with security controls. Azure Virtual Network facilitates secure site-to-site connections between on-premises networks and Azure VPN Gateway. Let me explain. First, Azure Virtual Network is used to create private, isolated environments within Azure where your resources like virtual machines can securely communicate. It also allows you to segment the network into subnets and apply security rules across them. Next, Azure ExpressRoute is ideal when you need a private, high-speed connection from your on-premises network to Azure. It completely bypasses the public internet, making it both secure and reliable, perfect for scenarios that demand consistent performance. Then we have Azure DNS, which helps you manage domain name system records for your applications. It integrates smoothly with other Azure services and allows custom DNS resolution within virtual networks. Azure VPN Gateway is used when you want to connect your on-premises network to Azure securely over the internet. It creates encrypted tunnels using standard VPN protocols. It also supports site-to-site configurations, which is useful for hybrid cloud setups. Each of these services addresses a specific aspect of networking in Azure, from private connectivity to name resolution, from secure tunneling to high-speed access. So when designing your Azure architecture, matching each service to its exact role is key to a secure and optimized deployment. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure does not offer cloud-based networking services like virtual private networks, VPNs. False. Azure provides a trusted platform for innovation with industry-leading security and compliance. True. Azure AI services can enable applications to understand speech, vision, and language. True. Azure storage solutions require users to manually scale their capacity. False. Let me explain. The first statement is false. Azure offers a wide range of cloud-based networking services, including Azure Virtual Network, Azure VPN Gateway, ExpressRoute, and Load Balancer. These services let organizations connect securely between their on-premises infrastructure and the cloud. Now, the second statement is true. Azure has built a strong reputation for its security and compliance posture. It offers a wide range of built-in controls, encryption options, and industry certifications, making it a highly trusted platform for businesses across sectors. Moving to the third statement, it is also true. Azure's AI services like cognitive services and Azure Machine Learning help apps interpret human features, such as recognizing speech, analyzing images, and understanding language. This enables smart apps like chatbots and language translation tools. Finally, the last statement is false. Azure storage solutions such as blob storage and data lake support auto-scaling. That means capacity adjusts dynamically based on demand, so there's no need for manual intervention when usage spikes. Altogether, Azure delivers powerful, scalable, and intelligent services that are both secure and easy to manage. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Availability zones are physically separate data centers within the same Azure region. True. Each availability zone has independent power, cooling, and networking to provide isolation from failures. True. Every Azure region supports availability zones. False. Availability zones help improve application resiliency by allowing replication across zones. True. Let me explain. The first statement is true. Availability zones are designed to be physically isolated data centers within a single Azure region. They're placed far enough apart to avoid being affected by the same local events, yet close enough to support low latency replication. Next, the second statement is also true. Each zone is equipped with its own power, cooling, and networking infrastructure. This independence helps ensure that if one zone fails, the others remain unaffected, keeping your application available. Now, the third statement is false. Not all Azure regions offer availability zones. Microsoft is gradually expanding this feature, but as of now, only certain regions have been built with the necessary infrastructure. Lastly, the fourth statement is true. Availability zones are key to application resiliency. By spreading app components across zones, organizations can ensure redundancy, enabling continued operations even if one zone experiences a disruption. So, availability zones offer fault isolation, better uptime, and higher availability, critical features for enterprise-grade cloud solutions. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. A virtual network must have at least one address space defined upon creation. True. A virtual machine can be deployed in a different region from its assigned virtual network. False. Subnet address ranges must be contained within the virtual network's address space. True. Azure automatically assigns an IP range to each virtual network without user input. False. Let me explain. The first statement is true. When creating a virtual network, you must define at least one address space. This address space sets the range of private IP addresses that Azure resources will use within that network. The second statement is false. A virtual machine must reside in the same region as the virtual network it connects to. Azure doesn't allow cross-region binding between a VM and its virtual network. Now to the third statement, which is true. A subnet is a subdivision of a virtual network, and therefore its address range must fit within the address space of the parent VNet. Otherwise, it won't be valid. Lastly, the fourth statement is false. Azure does not automatically assign IP ranges to VNets. The user must manually specify the IP address space when setting up a virtual network to ensure proper configuration and avoid overlap. So in summary, Azure gives you control over your network structure, but with that comes responsibility for specifying IP ranges correctly. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. FIDO2 security keys provide phishing-resistant authentication. True Windows Hello for Business requires users to enter a traditional password before using biometrics. False FIDO2 security keys are typically USB-based, but can also use Bluetooth or NFC. True Windows Hello for Business only supports PIN-based authentication and does not allow biometrics. False. Let me explain. First, the statement about FIDO2 security keys providing phishing-resistant authentication is true. These keys use public key cryptography, so users don't have to type in passwords that could be captured in a phishing attack. This makes FIDO2 one of the most secure authentication methods available today. Next, the claim that Windows Hello for Business requires a traditional password before using biometrics is false. Once Windows Hello is set up, users can authenticate using PINs or biometric methods like facial recognition or fingerprint scans. No need for a traditional password. Now to the third statement, it's true that FIDO2 keys are typically USB-based, but they also come in Bluetooth and NFC variants. This allows users to authenticate securely across a range of devices, even those without USB ports. Lastly, the statement saying Windows Hello for Business only supports PIN-based authentication is false. It also supports biometrics, so users can sign in using their face, fingerprint, or iris scan, depending on the device. So overall, both FIDO2 and Windows Hello for Business offer modern, secure alternatives to traditional password-based logins. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Azure RBAC roles can be assigned at multiple levels, including management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, and individual resources. True. If a user is assigned the reader role at the subscription level, they automatically get read access to all resource groups within that subscription. True, a user assigned owner permissions at the management group level can manage all subscriptions under that management group. True, Azure RBAC enforces access by blocking all actions by default and only allowing actions explicitly granted by roles. False. Let me explain. The first statement is true. Azure Role-Based Access Control, or RBAC, allows role assignments at various scopes: management group, subscription, resource group, and individual resource. This flexibility helps apply the principle of least privilege at different levels. The second statement is also true. If a user is granted the reader role at the subscription level, they automatically inherit read-only access to all resource groups and resources under that subscription. That's how inheritance in RBAC works. The third statement is again true. Assigning the owner role at the management group level gives full control over every subscription under that group. This means the user can manage access, resources, and policies across all those subscriptions. However, the last statement is false. Azure RBAC does not block actions by default. Instead, it follows an allow model, which means users have no access until a role is explicitly assigned. Once a role is granted, only the permissions in that role are allowed. Everything else remains inaccessible. So overall, RBAC offers a precise and flexible way to manage access control, but understanding the inheritance and allow-based model is key to using it effectively. What enables a user to sign in one time and use that credential to access multiple resources and applications from different providers? Select only one answer. A, conditional access, B, device management, C, multi-factor authentication, MFA, D, single sign-on SSO. Let me explain. The correct answer is single sign-on SSO. SSO allows a user to log in once and then access multiple applications or services without needing to authenticate again at each one. This improves user experience by reducing login fatigue and also centralizes the control of user sessions. Now, let's go over why the others are incorrect. Conditional access is a policy-based tool that determines whether to allow or block access based on signals like user location or device status. It doesn't handle repeated access across apps. Device management focuses on ensuring that devices meet security requirements, but isn't tied to login behavior across multiple systems. Finally, multi-factor authentication MFA strengthens security by requiring a second verification step during login, but doesn't enable one-time sign-on across apps. So if you're trying to streamline access while maintaining security, SSO is your go-to solution. Arrange the following steps for setting up and using an Azure account in the correct order. Instruction: drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top. 1. Sign up for an Azure account using a phone number, credit card, and Microsoft or GitHub account. 2. Create an Azure subscription within the account. 3. Start exploring and using Azure services within your subscription. 4. Upgrade the Azure account if necessary to access additional services beyond the free account limits. Let me explain. The very first step is to sign up for an Azure account, which requires a valid phone number, a credit card for identity verification, and a Microsoft or GitHub login. This step creates your identity in Azure. Next, you need to create a subscription. A subscription defines your billing boundary and allows you to organize and manage resources under that account. Then, once your subscription is active, you can start exploring Azure services. This includes deploying virtual machines, creating storage accounts, or experimenting with AI services under the free tier. Finally, if your needs grow or the free tier isn't sufficient, you can upgrade the Azure account to remove restrictions and gain access to a broader range of services. This sequence ensures you go from account setup to service exploration smoothly, scaling up only when needed. An organization needs to migrate 80 TB of on-premises data into Azure storage, but their network connection cannot handle such a large transfer efficiently. Which Azure service should they use? A. Azure Migrate. B. Azure Backup. C. Azure Data Box. D. Azure Site Recovery. Let me explain. The correct answer is Azure Data Box. This service is specifically built for large-scale offline data transfers. When internet bandwidth is too limited to handle large volumes efficiently, Azure ships a secure storage device to your location. You load the data onto it and ship it back to Microsoft, where it's uploaded to Azure. Now, let's look at the incorrect options. Azure Migrate is great for assessing and planning migrations, but relies on the network. It doesn't handle offline transfers. Azure Backup is designed for ongoing data protection, not bulk one-time transfers. And Azure Site Recovery is focused on disaster recovery and business continuity, not data migration. So when you're dealing with something as massive as 80 terabytes and network speed is a bottleneck, Azure Data Box is your best bet. A financial institution is running a high-performance AI application that needs low-latency storage for processing a large number of small object files. Which premium Azure storage solution best meets this requirement? Select one answer. A. Premium file shares. B. Premium block blobs. C. Premium page blobs. D. Standard general purpose V2. Let me explain. The correct answer is Premium block blobs. This storage option is purpose-built for fast access to block blob data. which makes it ideal for AI applications and IoT analytics that need to process a high volume of small files quickly and efficiently. The low latency of Premium Block Blob supports real-time data access, which is crucial for performance-sensitive workloads like machine learning models. Now let's clarify why the other options are not the best fit. Premium file shares are optimized for enterprise file sharing scenarios, such as lift and shift file server workloads, but not for object-based storage used in AI applications. Premium page blobs are mainly used for virtual disks, such as those attached to Azure virtual machines, not for processing small object files. And standard general purpose V2 offers versatile storage at a lower cost, but lacks the performance required for demanding latency-sensitive AI tasks. So for AI workloads that depend on quick access to a large number of small objects, Premium Block Blobs is the right tool for the job. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Standard general-purpose V2 storage accounts support blob storage, queue storage, table storage, and Azure Files. True Premium Block Blob storage is optimized for high-performance workloads with small objects and low latency. True Premium File Share storage supports both SMB and NFS file shares. True Premium Page Blob storage is used for storing unstructured data. False. Let me explain. Standard general-purpose V2 storage accounts are the most versatile and commonly used in Azure. They support a range of storage types, including blob, queue, table, and file storage, making them ideal for many general-purpose scenarios. Premium Block Blob storage, on the other hand, is optimized specifically for high throughput and low latency access to small files. That makes it a great choice for workloads like AI applications and IoT analytics, where quick access to lots of small objects is critical. Now, Premium File Share storage is built for enterprise-grade file sharing. It supports both SMB and NFS protocols, which are commonly used in Windows and Linux environments, respectively, giving organizations flexibility in how they access and manage file data. Finally, the idea that premium page blobs are used for unstructured data is incorrect. Page blobs are designed for disk-based use cases like Azure Virtual Machine disks, where frequent read-write operations on random byte ranges are required. For unstructured data, you'd typically use block blobs instead. So that's the breakdown of each statement, clear distinctions based on storage performance and use cases. Which service enables a consistent identity experience across both on-premises and cloud environments by syncing Active Directory AD with Microsoft Entra ID? A. Microsoft Entra Domain Services. B. Microsoft Entra Connect. C. Microsoft Azure MFA. D. Azure Active Directory B2C. The correct answer is Microsoft Entra Connect. Let me explain. Microsoft Entra Connect is specifically built to synchronize identities between on-premises Active Directory and Microsoft Entra ID. This makes it possible for users to have a unified sign-in experience, whether they're accessing cloud resources or on-prem systems, and it's especially useful in hybrid environments. Now, Microsoft Entra Domain Services provides domain join, group policy, and Kerberos NTLM support for legacy applications in the cloud, but it does not handle identity syncing. Microsoft Azure MFA focuses on multi-factor authentication and enhances security, but again, it's not about synchronizing identities. Lastly, Azure Active Directory B2C is intended for managing identities of external customers, not syncing enterprise directory services. So overall, if your goal is to create a seamless identity bridge between on-prem AD and cloud environments, Microsoft Entra Connect is the way to go. You want to verify that your VM is still running and accessible over HTTP on port 80. Which two steps should you take? Select two answers. A. Run AZ-VM list to check if the VM is still running. B. Use AZ network NSG rule create to allow SSH access on port 22. C. Run VM list IP addresses to find the public IP of the VM. D. Update the NSG to allow inbound access on port 80. The correct answers are run AZ VM list to check if the VM is still running and update the NSG to allow inbound access on port 80. Let me explain. To confirm whether your VM is running, the first step is to use AZ VM list. This command displays the current status of all VMs in your subscription, helping you determine if the target VM is in a running state. Without this, any other troubleshooting would be irrelevant if the VM is actually stopped. Next, to make sure your VM is accessible over HTTP, port 80 must be open. That's where updating the Network Security Group NSG comes in. By allowing inbound traffic on port 80, you're enabling HTTP connections to reach the virtual machine. Now, while SSH access on port 22 is useful for remote administration, it's not necessary in this context since we're dealing with HTTP traffic. Also, although getting the public IP using AZ-VM list IP addresses is helpful, it doesn't guarantee HTTP access unless the proper NSG rules are already in place. So in summary, first make sure the VM is running, then update the NSG to allow traffic on port 80 for HTTP access. You are considering deploying a virtual machine in Azure. Which of the following advantages do Azure virtual machines provide over traditional physical servers? Select two answers. A. Scalability through VM scale sets. B. Higher on-premises resource utilization. C. Availability through availability sets. D. Elimination of administrative responsibilities. The correct answers are scalability through VM scale sets and availability through availability sets. Let me explain. First, VM scale sets in Azure provide dynamic scalability, which means your virtual machines can automatically increase or decrease in number depending on the workload. This is something traditional physical servers can't easily achieve without manual provisioning, purchasing hardware, and lengthy setup processes. Next, availability sets enhance reliability. Azure strategically distributes virtual machines across multiple physical hardware nodes, ensuring that if one node fails, others remain unaffected. This kind of fault tolerance is especially beneficial for critical workloads and is far easier to implement in Azure than in a traditional server room. Now, higher on-premises resource utilization doesn't apply here. Azure VMs are hosted in the cloud, so they don't directly affect on-premise resources. And while Azure automates many tasks, virtual machines still require some administrative effort, such as configuration and updates. So, elimination of administrative responsibilities isn't entirely accurate. In summary, scalability and availability are the standout benefits that Azure virtual machines offer over traditional servers. Which of the following are valid blobs in Azure Blob Storage? Select two answers. A. Page blob. B. Table blob. C. Append blob. D. Directory blob. The correct answers are page blob and append blob. Let me explain. Page blobs are designed for scenarios that require frequent read and write operations at random locations. A common use case is storing virtual hard disk (VHD) files for Azure virtual machines, where quick access to different parts of the file is necessary. Append blobs, on the other hand, are optimized for sequential writing. This makes them ideal for scenarios like logging and audit trails, where new data is frequently added to the end of the file without modifying existing content. Now, table blob might sound plausible, but it doesn't exist. Azure Table Storage is a different service altogether used for NoSQL key value data, not a blob type. Lastly, directory blob is not a valid blob type either. Azure Blob Storage is flat in structure, and while it may visually simulate folders in tools like Azure Storage Explorer, it doesn't support actual directory-based blob types. So to wrap it up, page blob and append blob are the valid blob types you're looking for. Your organization is hosting images on Azure Blob Storage for a public-facing website. The files need to be accessible via URL, but only for read access. You also want to ensure sensitive files are never exposed. Which actions should you take? Select two answers. A. Enable blob public access. B. Enable container public access. C. Disable anonymous access at the storage account level. D. Use shared access signatures, SAS, for file access. The correct answers are enable blob public access and use shared access signatures, SAS, for file access. Let me explain. When you want files to be publicly accessible via direct URL but still maintain control over what's exposed, enabling blob public access is ideal. This allows you to make individual blobs available for public read access while keeping the rest of the container private. Next, using shared access signatures, or SAS, provides time-limited and permission-controlled access to specific files. It's a secure way to give temporary access to clients without exposing your entire container or needing to manage full account keys. In contrast, enabling container public access would expose every blob within that container, which poses a risk if there are sensitive files stored alongside public ones. Similarly, disabling anonymous access at the storage account level would block all public access, making it impossible to serve your website images. So to summarize, choose Blob Public Access for selective visibility and SAS for secure, controlled access. Determine if the following statements are true or false. Azure policy initiatives are groupings of policies with a common compliance goal. True, Microsoft Purview provides data classification only for on-premises SQL databases. False, resource locks can only prevent deletion of resources, not modification. False, the Service Trust Portal provides access to compliance documentation for Microsoft Cloud Services. Now let's explain. Azure policy initiatives are indeed used to group policies that support a shared compliance objective, making it easier to apply them across resources. Microsoft Purview, on the other hand, supports classification for both cloud and on-premises environments, including services like Azure SQL and Microsoft 365, not just on-premises SQL. Resource locks can do more than prevent deletion. They can also block modifications when set to read-only, which makes that statement incorrect. And finally, the Service Trust Portal is a centralized resource for accessing Microsoft's compliance and trust documentation, helping customers meet regulatory and audit requirements with ease. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Azure Monitor stores logs and metrics in central repositories. You can use tools like Custo queries and Power BI to create custom views and reports from this data. Now let me explain. Custo Query Language, or KQL, is the powerful language behind Azure Monitor's log analytics. It allows you to run advanced queries over large sets of log and metric data. For example, you could use it to identify performance trends in your infrastructure or isolate errors over time. On the other hand, Power BI provides a visual interface for turning this data into reports and dashboards. This is especially helpful when you're sharing insights with business teams or executives who prefer graphical views over raw query results. By combining KQL for deep analysis and Power BI for visualization, you get both precision and presentation. Meanwhile, tools like Azure Data Studio and Azure Resource Manager are not designed for these specific monitoring tasks, so they wouldn't be suitable choices here. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Microsoft Purview enables unified data governance, sensitive data classification, and end-to-end lineage across hybrid and multi-cloud environments. Let me explain. Microsoft Purview is designed to give organizations control over their data estate, whether the data resides on-premises, in Azure, or across other cloud platforms. First, unified data governance allows businesses to manage their data policies and ensure compliance across the board. This is especially important for regulated industries or companies dealing with massive amounts of structured and unstructured data. Next, sensitive data classification helps identify and tag data based on sensitivity labels such as personal information, financial records, or health data. This capability strengthens data protection and supports compliance with privacy regulations like GDPR. Finally, end-to-end lineage allows visibility into the data journey, where it originated, how it transformed, and where it is consumed. This feature enhances trust and accountability, especially when working in collaborative, distributed data environments. Together, these three features make Microsoft Purview a powerful tool for managing data in complex, hybrid, and multi-cloud ecosystems. For each cloud governance feature listed below the table, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Ensures that data is encrypted at rest and in transit. Encryption standards. Provides tools for tracking compliance with regulations such as GDPR and HIPAA. Compliance and auditing. Enforces rules to ensure that cloud resources meet organizational security standards. Policy enforcement restricts data storage and processing to specific geographic regions. Location restrictions ensures that only authorized users can access sensitive information. Encryption standards helps organizations automatically track and generate compliance reports. Compliance and auditing. Let me explain. Encryption standards play a critical role in cloud governance by protecting data during storage and transmission. They ensure that sensitive information, like financial or health records, remains secure and inaccessible to unauthorized users. Now, compliance and auditing provides tools like Azure Policy and Compliance Manager to help organizations track regulatory requirements. These tools generate audit trails and reports to demonstrate compliance with frameworks like GDPR or HIPAA. Policy enforcement ensures that organizational standards are upheld. It automates the enforcement of rules around cost control, security, and operational practices. For instance, you can ensure all virtual machines must have a specific tag or must use managed disks. On the other hand, location restrictions help meet data sovereignty laws. For example, a government entity may require that its data remain within a specific geographic region, such as the EU or the US. Cloud providers allow that by restricting where data can be stored and processed. All these features collectively support a strong governance strategy across your cloud environment. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The Service Trust Portal provides security insights for both Microsoft and third-party services. False. My Library in the Service Trust Portal allows users to save and track important compliance documents. True. Service Trust Portal does not provide any compliance tracking tools for Microsoft services. False users can receive notifications when compliance documents in their My Library are updated. True. True. Let me explain. The Service Trust Portal does not include insights for third-party services. Instead, it focuses strictly on Microsoft's own cloud security and compliance policies. That's why the first statement is false. Now, the second statement is true because the My Library feature in the Service Trust Portal allows users to bookmark or save specific documents and track them, which is very useful for staying current with compliance changes relevant to your organization. Moving on, the third statement is also false. In reality, the Service Trust Portal does provide compliance tracking tools that help organizations align with global standards and regulatory frameworks, such as ISO and GDPR. Finally, the last statement is true. When users save compliance documents using My Library, they can choose to receive notifications whenever updates are made. This feature helps ensure users never miss important policy or security documentation changes. What is the primary advantage of using reserved capacity in Azure? A. Pay-as-you-go flexibility. B. Greater control over virtual machine configurations. C. Up to 72% cost savings on predictable workloads. D. Elimination of network traffic charges. The correct answer is up to 72% cost savings on predictable workloads. Let me explain. Reserved capacity in Azure allows customers to commit to using specific resources, like virtual machines, over a 1 or 3 year term. In return for that commitment, they receive substantial discounts, up to 70% compared to standard pay-as-you-go pricing. This makes it ideal for businesses with steady, predictable workloads. Now, although pay-as-you-go offers flexibility, it typically comes at a higher cost, so it's not the primary advantage in this scenario. Additionally, reserving capacity doesn't give you more control over your VM configurations. It just gives you better pricing for a known usage pattern. Lastly, reserved capacity applies to resources like compute and storage, not to network traffic, so it does not eliminate network charges. That's why option C is the clear winner for this question. Which of the following categories is not covered by Azure Advisor's recommendations? A. Cost. B. Security. C. Reliability. D. Compliance. The correct answer is compliance. Let me explain. Azure Advisor is a helpful tool that provides best practice recommendations in 5 key areas: cost, security, reliability, operational excellence, and performance. These recommendations help organizations improve resource performance, tighten security, increase availability, and save on costs. Although compliance is a crucial concern in cloud governance, it is not within Azure Advisor's scope. Instead, compliance-related insights are handled by other tools, such as Microsoft Purview and the Service Trust Portal. Therefore, while options like cost, security, and reliability fall squarely within Azure Advisor's focus, compliance is not part of its recommendation categories. An administrator has been assigned the task of organizing Azure subscriptions using management groups. He created a management group named Finance Dept and assigned Operations Dept as its parent. When he attempted to assign HR Dept as another parent of the Finance Dept, Azure rejected the action and displayed an error. What is the reason for this issue? A. To assign a second parent to the management group, he needed to include an asterisk in the name. B. The HR dept group did not have the required permissions to act as a parent for another management group. C. The HR dept cannot be the parent of finance dept because it is not a parent of operations dept. D. Azure does not allow multiple parents for a single management group or subscription. The correct answer is Azure does not allow multiple parents for a single management group or subscription. Now let me explain. Azure's management group hierarchy is strictly tree structured, meaning each child management group or subscription can have only one parent. This enforces clarity and consistency in governance across resources. So in the case where finance dept already has operations dept as its parent, attempting to assign another parent, like HR dept, will be rejected outright by Azure. Including an asterisk in the name or adjusting permissions won't resolve this because the limitation isn't about naming or access rights. It's about structure. Furthermore, it doesn't matter if HR isn't already related to operations dept. Azure's restriction is based solely on the single parent model. So in summary, Azure enforces a single parent policy to keep resource hierarchies organized, which is why the administrator's action was blocked. The security team of an organization wants to implement the selective use of multi-factor authentication, MFA, based on multiple factors related to the authentication requests, such as device health and sign-in risk. Which service should they implement? A. Conditional access. B. Identity protection. C. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. D. Windows Hello for Business. The correct answer is identity protection. Now let me explain. Identity protection is specifically designed to use risk-based policies that evaluate signals like user behavior, sign-in risk, and device health to decide whether to enforce MFA. This makes it the ideal choice for organizations wanting to apply MFA conditionally, rather than always on. While conditional access can control access based on conditions like location or device state, it doesn't handle automatic MFA enforcement based on risk scores. Similarly, basic multi-factor authentication adds a second factor, but it doesn't analyze the risk or adapt the enforcement dynamically. As for Windows Hello for Business, it's a strong authentication tool using biometrics or PIN, but it doesn't offer any conditional or risk-based enforcement features. So if the goal is to implement MFA intelligently, where it's only triggered when a sign-in seems risky, identity protection is your go-to solution. Arrange the steps to access and use Azure Cloud Shell through the Azure portal. 1. Log into the Azure portal. 2. Click on the Cloud Shell icon in the top navigation bar. 3. Choose either Bash or PowerShell as the shell environment. 4. Wait for the shell to initialize. Begin executing commands to manage Azure resources. Let me explain how these steps work in sequence. To begin, you first need to log into the Azure portal using your credentials. This grants you access to the Azure Services dashboard. Once you're in, look for the Cloud Shell icon at the top of the screen, which opens the interface for executing commands. Next, you'll be prompted to choose your shell environment, either Bash or PowerShell, depending on your preference or the commands you need to run. After making a selection, Azure initializes the environment. This setup ensures that your session is ready for command execution. Finally, once the shell is fully initialized, you can start entering commands to create, manage, or troubleshoot Azure resources directly within the portal, making the process efficient and seamless. You are deploying multiple instances of a custom web application. These instances share a common management lifecycle, but are located in different Azure regions. Can you deploy resources across multiple Azure regions in a single resource group? Select one answer. A. Yes, because Azure allows resources in a resource group to span multiple regions. B. No, because a resource group must reside in a single Azure region. C. Yes, because resource groups are independent of regions. D. No, because Azure requires separate resource groups for each region. The correct answer is A. Yes, because Azure allows resources in a resource group to span multiple regions. Let me explain. Azure resource groups are designed as logical containers that can include resources from multiple regions. While the resource group itself has a location, this is primarily for metadata purposes like access control and replication, not a restriction on where the resources inside it can live. Now, option B is incorrect because a resource group doesn't force all its contents into a single region. In fact, one of the strengths of Azure is this flexibility. Option C sounds close, but it oversimplifies the relationship. Resource groups are logically tied to a region, but can still manage resources outside it. And D is false because you're absolutely allowed to have resources from different regions under one group. Separate groups are not a requirement. So in practice, let's say you deploy a front-end app in North Europe and its database in East US. You can manage both in the same resource group, which simplifies administration and lifecycle tasks. Your company is implementing conditional access policies in Microsoft Azure. Which security controls should be enabled? Select two answers. A. Require multi-factor authentication (MFA) for all privileged users. B. Allow all sign-ins from any device, anywhere, without verification. C. Block access to corporate applications from non-compliant devices. D. Automatically grant all users full access after successful login. The correct answers are A. Require multi-factor authentication (MFA) for all privileged users, and C. Block access to corporate applications from non-compliant devices. Let me explain. When implementing conditional access, the goal is to enhance security without compromising user productivity. Requiring multi-factor authentication for privileged users is a best practice because these accounts have elevated permissions and are high-value targets for attackers. Adding that second layer of verification significantly reduces the risk of account compromise. Now, blocking access from non-compliant devices helps ensure that only trusted, secure endpoints are used to access corporate resources. This means devices must meet specific criteria like being domain joined or having up-to-date security patches before gaining access. On the other hand, allowing sign-ins from any device without verification contradicts the whole purpose of conditional access. Likewise, granting full access after a successful login, regardless of device compliance or location, bypasses the risk-based controls conditional access is designed to enforce. So, combining MFA and compliance-based restrictions gives organizations strong protection against identity-based threats while enforcing access hygiene.